Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well and staying at home during these hectic times. Over here where I'm at, it's nice and rainy and foggy, so I'm feeling a little bit woodsy. I don't even know what that means. But I picked up a new set of stories, so this is actually interesting. Basically, once a year during Irish Heritage Day in Washington D.C., there would be certain groups of people passing around books that had short stories and poems from different Irish writers. So I was lucky enough to have two of those compilations, and I'll be reading one of the stories from today. So the book itself is called What's the Story? A selection of new writing from The Stinging Fly in Dublin in association with Solas Nua of Washington, D.C. This one was edited by Declan Meade. And there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 short stories and 8 poems. But I'll just be reading the first short story. This was published by The Stinging Fly for Irish Book Day, March 17th from 2014. So I'm actually not that far from that date. This book and Irish Book Day are founded in part by the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities, an agency supporting in part by the National Endowment for the Arts. So I will put in a link for the Stinging Fly organization on the description, and some information on the author for this particular story. This story is called By the Book by Michael J. Farrell. Next, she spat out the word near the end of a long day. Tap, tap came the white cane, tell-tale tool of the blind. The man shuffled forward and slapped 6 books on the counter, while the weary cane slid to the floor. Winnie looked from books to borrower, big and lumpy, nose flat like a boxer's, though she had never, to her knowledge, seen a boxer, bald on top, but a fringe at the back grown straggly and bound into a flaxen ponytail. Not our sort, she decided. About 60, I'd say. You need to be a member. She looked him in the eye and thought he didn't look the least bit blind. To be or not to be, solemnly he imitated Hamlet. If you wish to borrow books, that is. Despite all the stereotypes going around, there is no stereotypical librarian. But if there were, Winnie would be a candidate. Spinster with porcelain face and thin red lips that did not need lipstick, suspiciously black hair for 48. Demure on the outside. On the inside, turmoil. In theory, she was in favor of reading, including the books in her own library, but in practice, she resented readers. How much? He asked in a hoarse, damaged voice. Every book borrower was insuitable in a different way. Winnie disliked this fellow's assumption that money was an issue, which, however, it is. Name? White. Wilbur White, she wrote on a yellow form. He gave a local address. Are you new to the area, then? No. A more agreeable sort would have explained why, at this juncture, he suddenly needed no less than 6 books. But she let that pass, proud of her patience. She could always outfox these people in the end. Occupation? I follow the blind dog. I beg your pardon? Over the twisted trail? It was the last straw, though. She feared other last straws would follow. He signed the form she pushed in front of him. Voila! He can see that much. Though the signature did stray, though that too could be a ruse. He spoke in sign language to a woman behind him, small and tidy as he was big and loose, deaf, or he would talk to her, and dumb, otherwise she would talk to him. Sad, Winnie thought in an unguarded moment. Not my problem, she then reminded herself. The Crooked Timber of Humanity by Isaiah Berlin sat on the top of his pile. Winnie prided herself on being acquainted with every book in the library, yet she could not recall this one. Tragedy and the Theory of Drama by Elder Olson was next. Don't dare ask. Give him an inch and he'll prattle ad nauseum. He meanwhile stared over Winnie's head, where there was a print by Mondrian on the wall. That's the great thing about abstract art. You don't need to see it. The next book was Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher. Sure, I heard of it, but I didn't know we had it. On the cover, the earth was emerging from an eggshell. She played her laser beam over the barcode. All this intense material, what a mind he must have. There's just one thing. He can't read. Dreams of a Final Theory by Steven Weinberg came next. Now he's showing off. The scientists search for the ultimate laws of nature, this one explained. Ultimate, my eye. Isn't it a grand day now? One was expected to be civil, and furthermore she had found such innocent remarks often broke the ice once people discovered you were not the enemy. Yes, indeed, and added, people were never meant to live indoors. Now they've forgotten how it once was under the skies. Anyone can see where that will lead. Where? She couldn't help asking. Do you open on Sundays? He pointedly changed the subject. Of course not, she replied in a huffy way. For a moment they had almost made contact. They were within a few words of sharing something significant. Then the day fell back into incoherence. Declan, she called her assistant because a line had formed. She could be surprisingly affected by the books people borrowed. When fat Ginny Adams checked out steamy romances, it was impossible to deny that love of all sorts took place behind closed doors. At the end of a day, bombarded by a constant mix of wisdom and nonsense, Winnie was usually an emotional basket case. Next, she ran the laser over The Gift by Lewis Hyde, yet another work that had escaped her notice. Imagination and the Erotic Life of Property, the preposterous subtitle said. She would explore these books just as soon as he returned them. Life would be simpler if people borrowed the same books, of which there are far too many anyway. Winnie had a degree in library science and could rattle off the great libraries from ancient Babylon to the Bodleian. She had studied enough to know that most books were either useless or redundant. She once wrote a letter to the library journal suggesting an ombudsman who would alert people to the sheer repetition in most libraries. This created such an outcry that she never again risked airing her thoughts. Wilbur White's final book was a Tolstoy novel. Wouldn't you know, not a bit run-of-the-mill. She saw by the date due form that it had not been borrowed for 11 years. That must surely say something about the common sense of readers, about this new customer, and while we're at it, about Tolstoy. She had dusted this book year after year, but had never been tempted to read it. Not that she was illiterate. She had gone back to school for a master's in English literature. She could blind you with erudition about Milan Kundera and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and if you'd still stuck back there, Shakespeare. Not that she enjoyed these, nor yet that she was edified by them. She felt her special gift to the library profession, her Charism was precisely the fact that she did not go gaga over books. There you go. She slapped Tolstoy on top of the other five. I wonder. She excused herself. From the front office, she spied on them. If he were to get behind the wheel after that pathetic show of blindness, her professional pessimism would be vindicated. But it was the little woman who drove, her chin high. Sorry, Winnie said in a whisper to the universe. Sometimes life is what it seems. For a brief moment, she felt good that War and Peace was getting an airing. I'd marry him in a minute, she returned to her counter. But then there's the other woman. I don't know how to be deaf and dumb, just for starters. I wouldn't suit him. She copied his address and slipped it in her pocket. Professionalism is all I have left, and now that's slipping away. She drove past Wilbur White's house in her Toyota. It was a small house, white and tidy, and he so big. He was back in a week. Tap, tap. She didn't need to look up. I hope you enjoyed the books. It was a perfectly acceptable thing to say. The woman became his eyes, foraging through the book stacks. Whitney could not imagine by what arcane process they chose another 4 books, except that it had been years since any of the 4 was borrowed. Gradually, the professional crisis grew in Winnie's psyche. There was some great waste here. More books were ignored most of the time. Trees had been cut down to make paper for these books. An elaborate printing process was set in motion to spell out line after line of book after book. Before that, there was the lonely toil of writers, slow word after slow word, half the words crossed out again without seeing the light of day, scratch of the pen, wheezy drone of the computer. Winnie had tried it. She knew what was involved. Worse was the huckstering of a finished manuscript to editors and agents, then the interminable wait for rejection, or occasional elation when the publishing world trembled and someone said yes, followed by a further tiny shiver when the newspaper reviewed it. Then began the spotty life of the book. 1 in a million was cherished in drear homes, an idea whose time had come, while the others were lined up cheek by jowl to molder on the shelves of libraries like her own. Not many borrow this one, she ventured as she stamped The Psychology of War by Lawrence Lashon. No one at all, she assured her. He was back in 4 days, then in 3. She yearned to ask him how he did whatever he did, read or not read them. As his routine picked up speed, she figured he could borrow the whole library in a couple of years. Yet he was excruciatingly selective. One day they borrowed a dozen, carrying 6 each. These included Colleen Wilson's The Outsider, luminously intelligent, a quote declared on the front cover, truly astonishing. Exaggerated, to be sure, but she was impatient to have the book back and see for herself. Then he came daily. There's no law against it. Not only that, there was a growing satisfaction in seeing the books circulate. The thing most unbecoming to books was to be ignored, a repudiation of their very purpose. Winnie pondered these vague intellectual stirrings. What if I have a mission, a vocation? She read voraciously to get ahead of Wilbur White. It was embarrassing in her position to be following the lead of a blind man. She started making lists, moving books around, moving furniture around, making posters with messages. If you read only one book, let it be this one. The book would then fly off the shelf. The community picked up the buzz. People began to greet Winnie on the street. It's destiny. On a Monday morning, she packed several hundred selected books in cardboard boxes and ordered dumbfounded Declan to put them in her car. Look after the store, she admonished as she drove away. On the passenger's seat, she had spread a map of the area. I'm your local librarian, she said at the first door. I happen to know you don't use the library. The problem was which to say. Why don't I leave you half a dozen for starters? Is this a practical joke? Questions passed like clouds across the woman's face. Have you ever read the novel of John McGahern? Not yet. I have 8 grandchildren. If she invites me in, I'll drink the cup of coffee, whatever it takes. I also have history and technology and memoirs, and if you wish to be more daring, I'd recommend a biography of Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher. Quite odd, actually, but a genius. One must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star. He wrote that. But what does it mean? Oh, I wouldn't go looking for anything as ordinary as meaning in the case of Mr. Nietzsche. It's more a matter of, I don't know, of insight, I suppose. I'll give it a whirl, the woman said. I've died and gone to heaven. Winnie recorded the woman's particulars on her laptop. She noted that the book had been borrowed twice from the library 5 years ago. After that, nothing. This was no way to run the world. Nietzsche had gone crazy before he died, and no wonder. He probably suspected the centuries of neglect that lay ahead. The next 3 houses came up empty. Outside, a third car was parked, which made her suspicious. I know you're in there, she said in a girlish voice through the brass letterbox. I would never have done that in a million years. Something has come over me, and bless my soul, I'm enjoying it. I think perhaps Albert Camus, she said to a young couple. I have Exile in the Kingdom and several copies of The Stranger, a classic. But that's just an opinion. You might prefer religion or historical romances. She hoped to shame them into going for quality. It's not as if you have to read them. So she took 10. By noon, she had lent 300 books. She would return in 3 weeks, she told people. They smiled various smiles, from sincere to sarcastic. Yet there's something bigger going on here. Some of the best authors who ever lived were, she knew, beholden to her that day. By the end of a week, many of the library shelves were bare, and urgency grew on people. When will you be doing our street? I'll be down on Saturday. Would poetry interest you? I haven't looked at poetry since school. I'd suggest an American called Mona Van Duen. Listen to this. What is love? Truly I do not know. Sometimes, perhaps, instead of a great sea, it is a narrow stream running urgently. See what I mean? I'll have that one to be sure, the other party said. And Winnie threw in a history of China because, she said, for centuries the Chinese never existed. Not that you'd notice. You're pulling my leg, the other party grinned, happy to be conned. I'll run for office. There is a whole population out there waiting to be led. There were glitches. Books went missing. Winnie hired an assistant for the overworked Declan. Autumn darkened into winter, the time for reading. No one could recall such book mania ever happening before. Books always go missing. What matter is that they are lost in a good cause, like dead soldiers. As for turmoil, it must mean we're still alive. Winnie traded in her car for a van. What should not be overlooked is that I am happier than ever before. Several weeks into her odyssey, she came to the house of Wilbur White. The little woman invited her in. Wilbur sat looking into a fire. It didn't seem proper to pass without saying hello. Ah, yes, there were no books in sight. I generally recommended books, but you two know what you want. The little woman brought a glass of sherry. It wasn't about the books, Winnie said. It was about doing something. People were living one day after another as if it didn't matter, while every morning, if the truth be told, was the beginning of a new century. I'm talking rubbish, but why wouldn't I? I'm nervous. Fire down below, Wilbur White fingered the white cane fiercely. I'm sorry? The wind in the willows, the heart of the matter, the cat and canary. I'd read them all if I could see. His big face was innocent as an old angel's. I'm truly glad to have met you. Winnie stood to go. I'm glad to have met you too, he said with perfect poise. They shook hands. I'll persist until someone thinks of firing me. After so long a time, no one wants to do with books once they've been written. And when they do fire me, I'll write a fab reference for Declan, who has not had an idea for years. He'll be ideal. That was actually pretty cute. And I want to say kind of relevant for what's going on right now. I think a lot of people are going back to reading books and writing stories. I do think one of the nice things that have come out of this is the fact that we are kind of forced to maybe go back to old hobbies that we dropped off now that we are faced with just sitting at home, you know? So, the author was Michael J. Farrell for this short story, and there's a little blurb at the end of the book. So, Michael J. Farrell from the Irish Midlands spent many years in the USA where he did tons of journalism. His novel, Papaville, won Kansas City's Thorne Men Award in 1998. By the book is from Farrell's first collection, Life in the Universe, from Stinging Fly Press, 2009. A new collection, Life Here Below, will be published by New Island, Dublin later this spring. So, I will put that little blurb as well as a link to the Stinging Fly down in the description below for you guys to check out. I definitely think it's really important to support small artists. Let's see. I think we still have time, so how about we read a poem? Okay. So, this poem is called Safe House by Leanne O'Sullivan. I hope I do it justice. When they were beginning to build a country, some of the men came to hide in a house where there was a family and a child upstairs, listening. They told him what to say if anyone ever asked. They say they were never there. Say there was only a family in that house. And during the night the boy went to the room where their bags and belongings were hidden. He felt along the canvases, the moldy wet and sag of the straps. His fingers touched on papers and coins and lifted out the revolver, its coolness and the weight of it in its hands. Then he felt nothing. His blood crept slowly and dark along the floorboards underneath them, and the room shook and stood still and seemed to hang for a moment in that night. When they found him, they cleaned him, his face gently and quickly, and his mother wrapped him in a blanket and took him out to a corner of the farm and buried him. Back in the house, they gathered his things and built up a fire again in the kitchen, burning his clothes, his shoes, all the signs, and small, clumsily turning of a child. And the afterwards, in the freezing dark, the father went out to find the doctor and the parish priest, to tell them what had happened and what they should say if anyone ever asked. Tell them there was never a child. Say they were never there. There was never a home, or the found easy measure of a family. There was never a map that could lead back to or out of that place, known or imagined, where the furzy, the dark-rooted vetch, turned over and over with the old ground and disappeared. Oh, that one was creepy. I wonder if there's another one that's not as sad. Oh my. Well, let me know what you guys think of these stories and poems. I will continue to look for fun things to read out loud to you guys. I hope they are relaxing and helping you stay sane or entertained during these strange times. I do have, like I said, quite a lot of books, but I would enjoy continue reading stories from, or short stories from this little book I have here. Alright guys, everybody take care and have a good night. Okay, bye bye.